Hello, everyone, and welcome to Myth Busting Resume Templates. I'm really excited to jump into talking about what makes a resume template work and what makes it less effective. And first, I'd like to take a second to introduce myself. My name is Phoebe Gavin. I'm a career coach. I have my previous corporate experience was in the news industry, where I was either the hiring manager or on the hiring committee for dozens of open roles at very influential news brands. And today I want to walk you through the way that recruiters and hiring managers go through sort of the mental process of how they review resumes, and how certain layout tips and tricks can make it more likely that a reader chooses to actually dig into your resume and read it, and what kinds of mistakes make it more likely that they skip over your resume or skim it and decide not to read it in depth. And so we're going to jump into all of that. So one of the things that is really important to remember when you are thinking through resume advice that you're receiving, whether it's on this video or elsewhere that you've seen on the internet or from friends and family or other mentors or sponsors that you might be working with, is that there is going to be conflicting advice, because the hiring process is completely subjective. Every recruiter and every hiring manager is coming at this process in a different way, and they have, certain preferences that there's no way for you to know about, and there's no way for you to prepare for. So the only thing that you can really do is make decisions that maximize the likelihood that they are going to respond to you. You can't predict every single little preference that a hiring manager or a recruiter might have, but you can make sure that your layout is optimized for reading. And so that is what we're going to be focused on today, is making sure that your layout, as much as possible, entices a recruiter or a hiring manager to actually read your resume. So let's talk about a little bit about what recruiters and hiring managers do in the process when they are going through a giant stack of resumes. Now, on average, for an open corporate position, a company can receive, on average, 250 resumes. And again, that's average. Sometimes it's less than that, but sometimes it's more than that. And recruiters and hiring managers are really busy. Even though a recruiter's job is recruiting, and so their whole job is looking through resumes and interviewing people, they're responsible for filling multiple roles at one time. And so they have to be really efficient about how they make decisions about who they really spend time learning about, who they decide to call, who they decide to interview. And so, and the same is true for hiring managers, but even more so. A hiring manager has their core responsibilities that are sort of on their job description, but the team that they're responsible for is down a person, and so it's not working at capacity. Often, that hiring manager has to take on some additional duties to, make sure that team continues to run efficiently. And then on top of that, they have to go through those, hundreds of resumes and, make decisions about the hiring process all the way through to getting an offer. And that is a lot of time as well. So that hiring manager is basically responsible for 2.5 jobs when they have an open role on their team. So again, hiring managers are super busy, recruiters are super busy, and we can see from the recent survey that I'll link in the description below, said that recruiters only spend about 6 seconds making a decision whether they are going to read a resume or not. And so again, this is why I really emphasize the idea that the layout of your resume is really important, because 6 seconds is not enough time to actually read much of anything and learn about you. But 6 seconds is enough time to sort of take in from a visual perspective whether a resume seems like it's presenting professionally, that it is well organized, that it has potential. You can sort of pull that out in 6 seconds and then make a decision like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and skim this. And then once they skim it, they make, again, another decision. Should I read this more deeply? And if the skim goes well, then they read it more deeply. And if that deep read goes well, then you get a phone call. And so the thing that we're trying to optimize for in our layout is making sure that we get from that 6-second glance to an actual skim, and from a skim to an actual read. So let's talk about why that is so important. Let's jump into the actual layout things that we want to make sure that we are paying attention to. The big thing that we want to avoid is sort of the red flags that in that 6-second glance immediately tells a recruiter or a hiring manager that you're not somebody that your resume is not one that they need to spend some time looking through. If you're applying to positions in the US, then you're using a resume, not a CV. CVs can often be 2 pages, even for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience. But the convention in the U.S. is for someone who has who's early to mid in their career to be in sort of the one page mark. And so if your resume, if you are early, if they're hiring for an early career position and your resume is 2 pages, you're immediately going to end up in that maybe later, maybe I'll check this person out later position. And that's not where you want to be. So if you're early to mid-career, really try to get your resume to 1 page. But there will come a point, if you're getting more experience, that it makes more sense for you to go over to 2 pages. I think that happens for most people in sort of the 7 to 10 year mark. Once you get around that point in terms of how much professional experience you have, then you can start thinking about going over to 2 pages. Because once you're looking for those more middle to senior roles, then they're going to need to know a bit more about you before they go deep into making phone calls and setting up interviews and all of that. And so it's okay for you to go to 2 pages. And then also the experience that you have, it makes sense for them to want to go deep on that information, and you have enough of it that it makes sense to go to 2 pages. So make sure that you are paying attention to that page convention if we are talking about resumes in the US. Another thing about resumes in the US is that you do not want to be putting your photo on your resume. You would be surprised at how many people make this mistake. It is very common in Europe and in the UK for CVs to have photos, but it is not the convention in the US. And I highly recommend avoiding against it. It's a waste of space, but also it opens you up for bias. If you are a member of a marginalized community and you are, have your photo there, that makes it easily identifiable, even more easily identifiable in some cases, that you are a member of that marginalized community, you might open yourself up to bias. And you can avoid that by not putting a photo on your resume and using that space for something that does a better job of showing that your suitability for the position. Another thing that is really important to keep in mind is that you want to be focused on making sure that your layout is really easily read by robots, especially if you are applying to larger companies. Larger companies tend to use applicant tracking systems, and those applicant tracking systems, to help them organize the process so that people don't fall through the cracks. They still do sometimes, but that's the purpose of applicant tracking systems. And these ATSs often have sort of AI support that allows them to search for certain keywords, search for organized candidates in terms of highest potential before they get to the recruiter or the hiring manager's desk. So that stack of resumes, that digital stack of resumes, is sort of prioritized by the folks who have the most potential and are most likely to meet the job description's needs. Now, that bot can't make a favorable decision about you if it can't read your resume. And so it's really important that you have as simple of layouts as possible, that you don't have a bunch of bells and whistles, that you don't have a bunch of crazy icons and then lots of different blocks and columns that make it difficult for the bot to take a look at your resume and understand what it's looking at. You really want to make sure that that is as simple as possible. Another thing you want to avoid because that makes it so that the bot decides, yes, we want to go ahead and put that at the top of the list. We can see that this person is including many of the keywords that we have, that the hiring manager or the recruiter has identified as being high potential. And again, it can't make that decision if it can't read your resume. And so you always want to submit your resume either in a Word doc or in a PDF. And you always want to make sure that that layout is very simple, with just sort of straight lines, a little bit of bullets, but no sort of columns, no tables, no graphics that make it harder for the bot to understand what it's looking at. The next thing you want to avoid is really tight margins. When I'm working with career coaching clients who show me their resume for the first time, often I see these very tight margins because they're trying to cram as much information as they can onto that resume to make sure that people see all of their great experience. But that's not the right move. Again, we're talking about that 6-second decision where they're taking a look at that resume. When they see those really tight really tight margins and really tiny text, the snap decision for the subjective human being is like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to dig through this entire thing. Let me put that one to the side. I'll come back to it later. But that one that gets put back to the side, no one ever comes back to it. So it makes more sense for you to go ahead and go with a 1-inch margin. and edit down what you are putting in your resume so that it actually fits to 1 page or 2 pages if it's appropriate for you. And then making sure that your text is 11 or 12 point font and not anything smaller than that, unless we're talking about really insignificant information. That then maybe that can be a 10 or a 9. But for the most part, you really want to be most of your text to be 11 or 12 point font. And if for some reason once you bring in those margins, you're going over what you want to go over, that probably means that you have information in your resume that isn't actually relevant for the position. One of the big mistakes that a lot of folks make with resumes is that they put all of their experience into their resume instead of the relevant experience to the resume. That's why it's really important to customize your resume for each position, because it makes it a lot easier for you to keep to 1 page, because you're stripping out all of the things that are important for what you did in that role at that time, but are not as important for the role that you are applying for. And so another way to strip out some of that overflow, if you have them, is to also think about the older positions that you have that are maybe not necessarily relevant, or at least don't add relevant context to your application. In those cases, you can sort of just include the title, the company, the dates, and then leave out the bullets so that the time is accounted for, but you're not wasting space with bullets that describe experience that the recruiter or the hiring manager isn't going to be interested in learning about. So another thing that you want to make sure to avoid that often pushes a resume into sort of the irrelevant data zone or into overflow when you want to make sure that you stay to that 1 to 2 page mark is personal stuff or college details. So, we don't need to know, a hiring manager or a recruiter doesn't really need to know about your hobbies or what you do in your spare time. Volunteering can often be helpful if it is specifically relevant to the job. If it is not, take that out. And then, your education, once you're sort of 2 or 3 jobs into your professional career, that also can be minimized. You definitely want to show that you have any credentials that are necessary or relevant for the job, but you don't need to go super deep into your GPA and different clubs that you were in and projects that you worked on and courses that you took once you get into that point where you have professional experience. If you are doing your first or second job where you really haven't been out of university for very long, then that kind of information can be very relevant. But once you get 2 to 3 jobs in and you have some real professional experience, you really should minimize how much space your education is taking up, because in that 6-second decision whether to skim, and then during that skim portion, really all the recruiter is looking for in your education section is, do they have education, and is that education relevant to the job? And if the answer is yes and yes, then they're going to move on to reading other parts of your resume or making the decision to read it more deeply or call you. So having that additional information about what you did in college is not actually going to be useful. Another important thing is to make sure that you are thinking about the visual hierarchy of your resume. And we're going to look at some screenshots, not screenshots, I'm going to screen share very soon to show you some examples of how visual hierarchy can make a difference in that 6-second glance and also in that skim to make it more likely that I choose to read through your resume. And so when I talk about visual hierarchy, that's anything visual on the page, not the content of the page itself. So that could be fonts, that could be formatting, that could be the size of your comments, that could be bullets, that could be colors. All of those things are visual elements that help a reader understand what is important to look at in what order. And so having a visual hierarchy that really clearly indicates, helps a recruiter or a hiring manager walk through your resume quickly and make a decision to go ahead and read it more deeply and call you is going to be helpful. So now I'm going to switch over to my screen share, and we're going to walk through some of these. We're going to walk through some common internet resume templates, and we're going to look at them through this criteria that we just talked through, and we'll make a decision about whether they're helpful or whether they're not helpful. And another thing to think about, maybe come back to this video at the beginning, pull your resume up and walk through how your resume stacks up against some of these criteria that we just went over and some of the layouts that we're about to go over, and see if there are any changes that you need to make. So I'm going to head over to my screen share. So one of the really interesting things is that if you may use Google Docs to create documents, if you use Google Docs to make your resume, you will probably have seen that they have templates that you can look at to help you understand whether the help you sort of a shortcut basically to get you to a point where you're sort of getting things into your resume really quickly. And these are the 5 resume templates that they put forward as examples. My recommendation, if you are a Google Docs guru, is to not use any of these. They all have pretty big issues. We're going to go over 2 of them, and then we're going to head over to Etsy to look at some more that are a bit more design oriented. So when we look at this resume, one of the really cool things that we see is that it has really strong visual hierarchy. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger here. It has really strong visual hierarchy, and so your name is the name is big, and so as soon as that resume comes up, you immediately see like, oh, okay, this is the person that I'm evaluating right now. And then in terms of the margins, it's a little bit smaller than it should be. It's a little bit less than an inch, but it's not bad. And then you see pretty clear visual hierarchy in terms of this is where the experience is, this is where the education is, this is where the skills and awards are. So it's really easy for a recruiter to land on this and say, okay, this is an easy read. It's not going to take me a long time to figure out what this is. I'm going to go ahead and skim this right now so that I can get an understanding of whether this person is worth my time. And it's easy for them to make that decision because they know where all of the information is. So that's one area where this resume template is very successful. One area where it's not successful is the fact that it's gone with a 2-column layout. Remember, we talked about how 2 columns can make it more challenging for the bot in an ATS, an applicant tracking system, to read your resume properly. You want to make sure that you have 1 column going all the way down, not this split column situation. To a person looking at this looks great. This looks totally, it's easy for you to understand, easy for you to read, easy for you to see. But for the bot, this is difficult to understand. And if you are applying to exclusively small organizations that are not using applicant tracking systems, then you don't really need to worry about this step in terms of visual hierarchy. But if you're applying to larger organizations where you are uploading your resume to some sort of job website like Jazz or ADP or something like that, there is most likely going to be some sort of bot involved trying to prioritize the resumes for the recruiter. And so you want to avoid having a 2-column situation like this. Another big reason why 2-column is bad is because it reduces how much space you have to talk about yourself. Look at how much space the skills and awards section is taking up. Yes, those are important pieces of information for someone to know about you, to evaluate you as a candidate, but it's far more important for them to understand your experience. And in this template, you only have this much space to talk about your experience. That's not enough space. On the other hand, if these skills, the skills section and this award section were at the bottom, and you were able to take your experience all the way across, you'd have much more space to talk about the actual important thing that the recruiter wants to understand. Does this person have the experience to do the job well? Because at this point in the process, the thing they are trying to understand is, does this person have the experience to do the job well? And so you don't want to shortchange yourself by using a 2-column layout, because it cuts down how much space you have to talk about what makes you the right candidate. I really like that this, in terms of visual hierarchy, again, I really like that this includes this blue font color against this black font color against the white background. For a person who is looking at a resume, it makes it a lot easier for them to find the information because these blue parts pop out. This is not going to make a difference for the bot, so it's okay for you to use a little bit of color to make your resume easier to sort of view and scan. But I want to make sure that I would really recommend against using sort of wacky colors. Sort of sticking with something that is, sticking with blue or green, maybe purple, sort of colors that are on the more conservative side are going to give you that visual hierarchy, help you with that without sort of giving the impression of unprofessionalism. If I got this version of this resume in front of me and these colors were, pink or, something orange or something like that, it wouldn't make any difference to me. I love color. But if you are applying for a position that is at a company that's a bit more conservative, you really want to stay in that more conservative color scheme. Another reason why sort of blue is a really good one to stick with is because it is a color that sort of makes us feel more at ease psychologically. And so, we associate blue, if you think about the things that are blue in our lives, they're things that either make us feel calm or things that make us feel safe. So the sky is blue. Hospital icons are usually blue. Police icons are usually blue. And so the idea of sort of competence and gravitas and safety are it's sort of a almost like a subconscious way for you to get that across with your resume if you use a blue color to direct the eye. So I would recommend against using this template and instead using one that has one column. But other than that, this is a decent template. So if you are using this one, like we do have a viewer who is using this template, my recommendation is that you pull the skills and awards and languages section out and put it underneath so that you can put your experience all the way across. Another thing that would be useful for you to get rid of with this one is if you have filled this information out where you're giving like your full address, your full phone number, and your email address, that's a little bit of a waste of space as well. The only thing that they really need to know is your city and state and your phone number and your email address. You can use that other line to say a little bit more about yourself. And so we have this name, but then we have this subtitle underneath. That can be really useful in saying, giving a quick summary of who you are, that you are a copywriter or you are a graphic designer, so that they immediately know, like, okay, this person is applying for the right position. So let's move on to the second Google Docs template. This is another one that has sort of the same problem as the one that we talked about before. Let me go ahead and make it full screen. That it has two columns, but it's even more wasteful because these big blank areas here are actually doing nothing to say more about who you are as a professional. So this is a terrible, terrible, terrible template to use. This space is what might, if your resume gets printed out, the recruiter might use this to sort of jot down some notes, but it's a huge waste of real estate. And resume real estate is so, so, so precious. You only have 1 or 2 pages to talk about yourself. And so wasting this entire column, basically a third of the page with just white space is a terrible, terrible idea. And it would be so easy to, bring this information down a little bit and have it go all the way across so that you could use the full real estate available for your resume. One thing that I do like about this is, again, they're using color to draw the attention. Orange is also a really great color to use because it is really poppy, it is high energy, and it can give the impression of a really sort of high energy candidate if you're using a color like orange. Now, yellow also is high energy, but yellow is going to be hard to see against white. And also yellow is often a color that we associate with emergency. And so I wouldn't recommend using yellow, but blue and green and orange are all colors that are perfectly fine to use if you want to incorporate some color to help people draw the reader's eyes to specific information in your resume. I don't think color is used particularly well with this one. When you think about, when you looked at this, when this layout came out for you, you immediately looked at that creative director, and then you probably immediately looked at the phone number and email address example. And when you think about a recruiter, what is the thing that you want them to look at? Yes, you want them to see that subtitle that says, this is who I am. But do you want the second thing they look at to be your phone number? No, you want the second thing that they look at to be your skills and experience. And so this is not the best application of color, even though it's a good choice of color. And then again, we have a lot of wasted space up here at the top because this isn't being used to tell any story about who you are, to give any information about who you are. So I don't recommend using this template at all. Let's jump over to Etsy with the time that we have left. I love the idea of going to Etsy and choosing and buying a resume template from Etsy. You're going to get something that is very attractive to the human eye, but you're not always going to get something that is good for applicant tracking systems, and you're not always going to get a layout that helps you efficiently talk about who you are as a professional, but you'll always get something that looks good. And so we're going to look at a couple of Etsy examples, and we'll talk through what works and what doesn't work about those templates. So let's start with this one here. So this template, again, we're seeing a couple of the issues that we saw before. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. And so we're seeing that nice big name right up front and then a subtitle saying exactly what kind of work you do. That is a really great way to start off your resume. But again, then we get into the two-column situation that's quite a bit wasteful, and makes it a bit harder for you to talk about your professional experience. We're seeing really tight margins, which makes the resume look a little intimidating to read. But we are seeing really good visual hierarchy. So we're seeing really clear sections that say this is, if you what information you're looking for, it's right here. The education is pretty minimal because in this example resume, we're seeing someone who has quite a bit of work experience, so their education is minimized. It's great that they are listing out specific skills, and that those specific skills are should always be relevant to the resume. I mean, relevant to the job that is being applied to. Excuse me. But you should always make sure that that space is being used really well. And again, with the two columns, we're taking space away from the professional experience, which is actually more important than this skills section. Another thing that is good about this resume is that it does have a professional summary section. That was almost serves almost like a mini cover letter. However, that professional summary should not be a giant block of text. It should be really easy for someone to skim that paragraph and get a really good understanding of who you are and what makes you tick. A really great way to do that is to bring in some more formatting into this area. So bolding or adding color to the words or phrases that you really want them to see in your professional summary when they grab their eye so that they decide to actually do a skim or they decide to actually do a read. And another thing that is not the best about this template is that it has these icons here. The applicant tracking system not going to know what those icons are, and so it's kind of a waste of space. It's pretty good for a person to see them. It adds a little bit of visual interest, but it's unnecessary visual interest. A person knows seeing numbers in a phone number format that it's a phone number, and so they don't need to see that icon for it to be clear that this is your phone number. So it's almost like a visual flourish that doesn't have a purpose, that doesn't actually help move the needle in terms of getting someone to read your resume. So while there are a lot of things going for it, this is not a template that I would recommend that you pick up on Etsy. Let's move over to this one, which is specifically says that it is applicant tracking system friendly. And so let's walk through this one and see what works for it and what's working well and what's not working well. Let's head over to this one page, the full page. So right off the bat, I think this is a nearly perfect template. So you have your name really big. One thing that I would add here underneath is some sort of subtitle that, like we've seen in some of the other ones, that sort of summarizes in a word or a phrase or a title what it is that you do. We have a really efficient use of space with the the contact information zone. And that contact information is exactly the information that's necessary and not more. So we have a phone number, email address, location, and a LinkedIn. If you put your LinkedIn on your resume, make sure that that link is clickable. If you create your resume in Word and put it as a link, or do it in Google Docs and put it as a link. If you save it as a PDF versus printing it as a PDF, if you save it as a PDF, then that link is going to work for a person who downloads that file. So give that a thought. The professional summary is fantastic. We have two bullets here that give you some clear space to talk about two really important parts of who you are. From that 6-second glance, it's really easy for you. Like, okay, I can get a understanding of who this person is really quickly because of the way that the professional summary is laid out. You have those two bullets, and then underneath you have those skills. And so it can be really easy for someone to just take a look at this again in that 6-second decision to glance, to make a decision to skim or to read. All they have to do is skim this top part to make a decision to read the resume. So this is a fantastic professional summary area. Also, I like this use of color. It's very sort of gentle. We have this sort of blue-gray color that adds a little bit of visual interest, but it's not sort of overbearing. And again, it draws the eye. So you see that gray-blue is shows your professional summary. It highlights the experience. And so it makes it really easy in the glance mode when they're only spending 6 seconds for them to decide, yes, okay, let me go ahead. I know exactly where my eye needs to go to get the information that I'm looking for. We have one column, which is fantastic for applicant tracking systems. Unsurprising, since this Etsy creator has said their applicant tracking system friendly resume. And then that's taking up the entire width of the page, which gives you a lot more space to talk about who you are and what makes you special and everything that they want to know about you. I love the way that this professional experience sort of template part is laid out. So we have a bold for the position title, the company and the location underneath. I would find a way to, one adjustment that I would make to this is I would probably find a way to highlight that a little bit, because sometimes that can be something that is really interesting. If you've worked for organizations or companies that are high profile, having that pop on your resume can be really great in that 6-second glance situation. We're like, oh, okay, this person's worked for Google. That's interesting. And that can get you into the skim section. And so this would be one where I might make the company and the location a little bit bigger. And I might even make it that gray blue color or put that gray blue background behind the company and the location so it pops nicely. You can see that they have a little, a few just regular text right under the company location, and they actually tell you what to do with that space exactly the way that I would recommend, using it to give a summary of the position. I think it's always useful to have a quick line that just says, this is exactly what I did. This was the purpose of the job. And then using your bullets to talk about why you were able to do that job particularly well. Now we have a question coming in from Ellen asking if links screw up the applicant tracking system. And in my experience and my knowledge, talking to a few different vendors for the applicant tracking systems that I used when I was in corporate hiring, that it does not mess with the ATS at all. It sees it as a link and basically thinks of it as irrelevant information, because the applicant tracking system is looking for keywords. It has either been fed the job description, or the recruiter or the hiring manager has given it a list of keywords that it's looking for that indicate that this is a high potential resume. And then it's looking at all of the resumes and saying which one of them have the most are most similar to the job description, or which one of them have the most of the keywords that I was given in my list. And then once the bot sort of figures out the list in terms of like which has the most and which has the least, it presents the highest potential resumes to the recruiter so that a human eye can take a look. And just because you end up at the bottom of the list and from the applicant tracking system doesn't mean that you won't get a call, but it does really reduce the likelihood. And so the link part of it really doesn't matter at all in terms of what the bot is doing, but it's really helpful for human beings, especially, again, if you save it as a PDF so that the link still works versus printing it as a PDF where the link will just show up as color and it won't actually be clickable. Then if the hiring manager or the recruiter takes a look at your resume, they can click it and they can click your LinkedIn and actually look at your LinkedIn and maybe see even more information about you, or they can click on your portfolio website, or an article that you've written, or whatever links that you feel like are relevant to add to your resume. If you save as a PDF, those links will work so a human being can interact with them. So make sure that you always do that. So another thing that I think that this template is the word that I was looking for, does really well is that it encourages you to make sure it gives you some actually good directions in terms of how to think about writing your resume. And so each of the recommendations that are in this bullet here are actually really good instructions for how to write a resume. So this is a really fantastic one. The one, since this is the 2-page version of the resume, it doesn't give a section for the education. So let me switch to this one where it does. And so down here we see education and certifications. And again, it is perfect in that it is really limited in terms of how much information it gives in terms of education and certifications. You really only need to know a recruiter or a hiring manager who is hiring for someone who has been, who is sort of mid or senior career, is not really that interested in all of this stuff about your education. They really just need to know, did you go to college? What did you go to college for? When did you graduate? Do you have a certification? Where did that certification come from? So this layout is actually perfect. So really, when we take a look at this one, the only thing I would change about it, the only two things that I would change about this template that I think it's basically perfect, is that at the top, I would add another line under the name that is basically like a job title. And then under the position name, I would do something to highlight the company name so that the company stands out to a recruiter or a hiring manager. If that's something that if the companies that you've worked for are sort of high profile or impressive, that's a really great way to catch their eye. So I hope that this was a really useful look through some templates and gave you some ideas for the resume that you're working on now. This resume template I will have linked in the description, and I will also have linked in the community. I highly recommend that if you are not a member of my community, the Better Crew, I highly recommend that you join because I do videos like this exclusive to that group all the time and only infrequently outside in the world on YouTube like today. So the link to that will also be down in the description, and I hope to see you there. Talk soon. Bye.